A winter morning in rural Ohio. Ice so thick the road looks like a sheet of frosted glass. I pull my truck to the curb, roll down the window, and warn my neighbor, a woman who has made the last 2 years of my life a living regulatory nightmare, that the stretch of Millbrook Road at the bottom of the hill is basically a hockey rink. She doesn't say thank you. She doesn't slow down. She laughs. She actually laughs at me, waves her hand like I'm a bug she's shooing off her windshield and says, "By Blader and Median more time fixing that eyesore. You call a front yard, we'd all be better off. It's not an eyesore. We'd all be better off." Then she floors it. I watch her Cadillac Escalade, the one with the custom HOA president vanity plate, disappear around the bend. Then I hear it. What happens next changed everything, and I mean everything. What would you have done if your neighbor dismissed a safety warning like that? Drop it in the comments. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your state below. I want to see how many of you live under an HOA right now. Let me back up about 2 years because you need to understand what kind of neighborhood I was living in before you can truly appreciate what happened on that icy February morning. My name is Garrett Welliver. I'm a 46-year-old electrician out of Millbrook Township, Coshocton County, Ohio. I've lived in the same 3-bedroom house on Sycamore Ridge Drive for 11 years. I put the deck on myself. I laid the stone path along the side yard by hand. You know, one of those weekend projects that takes 3 weekends and costs you 2 fingernails and a strained lower back. I know every pothole on my street. I know which side of the road catches ice first when the temperature drops. I know my neighbors, or I thought I did. The Millbrook Sycamore Ridge HOA had existed since 2009, mostly as a paper tiger, a quarterly newsletter about gutter cleaning and the occasional email about parking. It had real authority on paper. It could find residents, mandate landscaping standards, even pursue liens if dues weren't paid. But for the first 9 years, nobody really exercised those powers because the board was run by a rotating cast of reasonable people who understood that neighbors are not subjects. Then Deirdre Holcomb moved in. Deirdre was 58 when she arrived on Sycamore Ridge, fresh off a contentious early retirement from the Coshocton County Assessor's Office, where multiple co-workers had reportedly filed HR complaints describing her as procedurally aggressive. She drove a Cadillac Escalade. She planted a flag, literally, one of those decorative porch flags that said, "This home follows the rules." She ran for HOA president within 8 months of moving in. She won by 4 votes because most residents didn't bother to turn in their ballots. That's the thing about HOA elections. Apathy is always the villain's best campaign manager. Within 6 weeks of taking office, Deirdre had issued 47 violation notices across the 22-home community. 47. I got 3 of them personally. One for having a trash can visible from the street on a non-trash day. It was there for 4 hours while I was at work. One for a non-compliant mailbox post that was identical to every other mailbox post on the street, and one for a garden hose left coiled on my front step, which she deemed an unsightly fixture inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. The fines were small at first, $15 here, $25 there, but they accumulated, and they came with language designed to intimidate, references to lien authority, to escalating enforcement protocols, to the HOA's right to engage legal counsel at homeowner expense. My neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named Dwight Ackey, got a fine for parking his own truck in his own driveway at a tawdry angle that Deirdre claimed violated the parallel to curb parking provision. Dwight is 63 years old with a bad hip. He measured the angle with a protractor. It was 1 1/2 degrees. Deirdre had 3 allies on the 5-person board. Her friend Patrice, who Deirdre had recruited to fill a vacancy, a retiree named Gorman, who seemed to vote. However, Deirdre voted without reading anything, and a younger woman named Steph, who was clearly afraid of Deirdre and went along to avoid being targeted herself. That left one board member who pushed back, a soft-spoken engineer named Vincent Calloway, who documented everything, questioned every fine, and became my most important ally, though neither of us knew it yet. By January of that second year, I had paid over $600 in fines I didn't legally owe and couldn't yet prove were improper. I was angry, I was tired, and I was done playing defense. The first crack in Deirdre's armor appeared in late October, roughly 14 months into her reign of procedural terror. It was small. It smelled like opportunity. I was in my garage on a Saturday afternoon, oil on my hands, the sharp bite of motor degreaser cutting through the cold air, drifting under the door when my phone buzzed with a notification from the HOA portal. A new fine had been posted, $35 for unapproved sports equipment storage, which apparently referred to my son's basketball hoop at the end of the driveway. My son Cody is 14. That hoop has been there since he was 9. I set down my socket wrench and pulled up the HOA's governing documents, the CCNRs, the bylaws, and the rules addendum on my phone. I downloaded them months before, after the mailbox incident, and I'd been reading them the way you read a lease when you're pretty sure your landlord is cheating you, slowly, low, okaying for the lie. And there it was, Section 7, 4 of the rules addendum, which governed recreational equipment, portable recreational structures, including basketball hoops on wheels or temporary bases, shall be permitted in driveways and on private property aprons, provided they do not obstruct sidewalk access or extend into the public right-of-way. Cody's hoop was on wheels. It sat in the driveway. It obstructed nothing. The fine was invalid. Not gray area invalid. Flat-out plain language invalid. Here's the move most people don't make. They pay the fine and grumble. The correct move is to respond in writing, cite the exact provision, and request a formal hearing, because the hearing creates a paper trail, and a paper trail is where petty tyrants go to die. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board. Certified mail board, return receipt requested, which costs about $4, and proves they received it, citing Section 7 for verbatim, stating the fine was improper, demanding it be rescinded within 14 days, and requesting a written explanation if it was not. I CC'd Vincent Calloway by email. Vincent called me 20 minutes after I sent it. "She's going to be furious," he said. "Good," I said. Furious people make mistakes. The board held an emergency meeting 3 days later without notifying the full membership, which as it turned out violated their own by law, requiring 7 days' notice for non-emergency meetings. Deirdre sent me a response letter stating that the fine stood because the board retains interpretive authority over all rules provisions. That phrase, interpretive authority, is real. HOA boards do have some discretion in how they apply rules, but that discretion has limits, and those limits are set by state law. In Ohio, HOA enforcement is governed in part by the Ohio Planned Community Law, OC Chapter 5312. Under that statute, fines must be reasonable, consistently applied, and based on a rule that actually exists. Interpretive authority does not mean we can ignore what the rule literally says. I found this out by spending 45 minutes on the phone with a property rights attorney named Rosalind Featherstone, out of Columbus, who I'd found through the Institute for Justice's referral network. She didn't charge me for that initial call. She told me I had a strong case, but advised patience. Takeaway: in Ohio and most states, HOA boards cannot create violations from thin air or overrule the plain text of their own governing documents. Know your state's planned community statute. It's usually one Google search away. I paid the fine under written protest, the words "paid under protest," dispute reserved on the check memo line, which preserved my right to pursue reimbursement. And I started a spreadsheet. Every fine Deirdre had ever issued, every meeting notice, every bylaw I could find that she'd quietly violated in the process of running the board. I also did something Deirdre didn't expect. I knocked on doors, not to complain, not to gossip. I brought a printed copy of Section 7.4 and asked each of my neighbors a simple question. Had they received any fines they thought were unfair? Within a week, I had statements from 9 homeowners describing fines for things explicitly permitted under the HOA's own documents. Dwight Ackerman, the Kowalski family at the end of the cul-de-sac, an older woman named Bernarde Haas, who had been fined for a wind chime. A wind chime. The pile was growing. Deirdre didn't know it yet, but the trap was already being built, one certified letter at a time. Deirdre's response to my certified letter wasn't to back down, it was to escalate, which looking back was exactly what I was hoping for. She began holding weekly board inspections, unannounced walks through the neighborhood with a clipboard and a digital camera documenting violations. She targeted the same homeowners who had spoken to me, Dwight got a new fine for a deteriorating driveway apron. The Kowaleski family received notice that their fence posts needed to be repainted because the color, which matched the original fence color, was now non-compliant with the updated color palette. There was no updated color palette. She'd made it up. This is what petty authority looks like when it feels threatened. It doesn't retreat, it doubles down. And in doubling down, it tends to overextend. But here's what Deirdre didn't realize she'd handed me. The inspection program had a fatal flaw. Under the HOA's own bylaws, Section 12(1), Enforcement Procedures, any fine of $50 or more required photographic documentation and a written violation notice delivered at least 10 days before the fine was posted to the homeowner's account. Deirdre was posting fines within 48 hours of her inspections. She was procedurally invalidating her own enforcement actions. I called Rosalind Featherstone again, paid for a full hour this time, $250, which felt steep until she told me that any fine issued in violation of the HOA's own procedural rules was unenforceable and potentially recoverable under Ohio's consumer protection statutes, specifically the Ohio Consumer Sales Practices Act, OC 1345, which prohibits deceptive acts in consumer transactions, and courts have held that HOA fine practices can qualify. Takeaway: if your HOA doesn't follow its own procedural rules when issuing fines, those fines may be void. Document the timeline of every violation notice you receive. I compiled the timeline for every fine issued since Deirdre took over. 12 of the 17 fines issued in the past 3 months failed the 10-day notice requirement, combined across all affected homeowners. KD notice requirement, combined across all affected homeowners. That represented over $1,400 in potentially void fines. I also made a discovery that changed the temperature of everything. While cross-referencing the HOA's financial records, which are under Ohio law, available to any member upon written request, I found something odd. The HOA's operating reserve, which should have held approximately $18,000 based on the dues collected over the prior 2 years, showed a balance of just under $4,000. The difference hadn't been spent on any documented community project. The money was there. Then it wasn't, and nobody had voted on where it went. I printed the ledger pages, put them in a manila folder, and labeled it Exhibit A. Meanwhile, Deirdre was not finished with her campaign of pressure. She sent a letter to the entire community, all 22 households, with a passive-aggressive paragraph noting that certain residents have chosen to challenge the board's authority rather than contribute to community harmony without naming me. But in a neighborhood this size, everyone knew. She also proposed a new rule at the November board meeting, a $50 annual inspection fee that homeowners would pay to fund the cost of the compliance program. The fee wasn't in the budget. It hadn't been voted on by the community. She announced it as if it were already decided. Vincent, who attended every board meeting with a legal pad and a recorder, raised his hand. Under Section 3.7 of the bylaws, new fees require a 2/3 vote of the full membership. Not the board, he said, reading directly from the document. Deirdre looked at him like he'd tracked mud on her carpet. The board has authority to implement reasonable fees for services rendered. That authority is explicitly limited by Section 3.7, Vincent said. Do you want me to read it aloud? She gave the meeting to a close 15 minutes early. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the HOA financials, and a thermos of coffee going cold beside me. The creak of the furnace kicking on, the distant bark of the Kowalski dog, the scratch of my pen on paper, and a plan that was finally starting to have the weight of something real. I texted Vincent. I found the missing money. We need to talk. His reply came back in 30 seconds. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Word travels fast in a 22-house neighborhood, especially when a retired postal carrier named Dwight Ackerman starts making phone calls. Within 2 weeks of my door-to-door survey, we had 7 homeowners who'd agreed to formally dispute their fines in writing. Simultaneous certified letters, which is a move that's harder to ignore than a single complaint. There's a legal term for the strategy, coordinated dispute submission. There's a practical term for it. She can't fire us all. Deirdre noticed she had 7 certified letters arriving within 4 days of each other, each citing specific bylaw provisions, each requesting a formal hearing, each CC'd to Vincent Calloway. Her response was to hire an attorney. A letter arrived from the law offices of Greenwich and Salt in Columbus addressed to me individually, stating that the HOA board had retained legal counsel in response to coordinated homeowner interference with board authority and warning that further harassment of board members or attempts to undermine the governance structure could result in legal action. It was meant to scare me. I read it twice, highlighted 4 phrases, and forwarded it to Rosalind Featherstone with a note. Does this letter itself constitute a threat actionable under Ohio's anti-SLAPP statute? Rosalind called back within an hour. It's close, she said. They'd argue it's protected legal communication, but if they actually sue you for disputing fines, yes, that's exactly what the anti-SLAPP statute is designed to address in Ohio. A strategic lawsuit against public participation. Takeaway: Ohio's anti-SLAPP statute OC 23235. 1 provides protection against frivolous lawsuits designed to silence citizen participation. If an HOA sues you for speaking up at meetings or filing legitimate disputes, you may be entitled to attorney's fees if you prevail. We held an unofficial community meeting at Dwight Arian's house on a Thursday evening in December. Dwight's living room smells like old books and coffee, and his walls are covered with framed photographs of postal routes he'd worked over 30 years. There were 14 homeowners crammed into his living room, sitting on folding chairs and the arms of couches, with hot cider on the kitchen counter, and somebody's dog snoring under the coffee table. I laid it out plainly. The improper fines, the procedural violations, the missing reserve funds, the intimidation letter, the legal framework that protected us. I watched people's expressions shift from resigned frustration to something that looked like relief. The specific relief of realizing you're not crazy. The system actually is broken and there's a path through it. Bernarde Haas, the woman who'd been fined for the wind chime, raised her hand near the back. Can we vote her out? Yes, Vincent said. Under Section 4.66 of the bylaws, any board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the membership at a special meeting provided 14 days written notice is given. How many votes is that? Somebody asked. 15 out of 22 households, Vincent said. We have 14 in this room. The room went quiet in this specific way. Rooms do when people are doing math and liking the answer. We started a petition that night. Old-fashioned paper signatures and pen notarized by Dwight's neighbor, who happened to be a notary public. We needed the petition to formally call a special membership meeting under the bylaws. By the following Tuesday, we had 16 signatures. Deirdre had lost the room, and she didn't know it yet because she'd stopped attending anything that wasn't a board meeting she'd see. Bowled herself. On December 19th, we delivered the formal petition by a certified mail to each of the 5 board members, requesting a special meeting for January 15th for the purpose of considering removal of Dara Holcomb from the position of HOA president. 2 days later, on December 21st, Deirdre sent a response, also certified, which I appreciated for the irony, stating that the petition was procedurally defective because 2 of the 16 signatures belonged to households that were currently in violation status and therefore, per her interpretation, lacked voting rights. She'd invented that provision too. There is no violation status voting restriction anywhere in the bylaws. I'd read them 4 times. Rosalind's advice: proceed as if the meeting is valid, document everything, and let her try to enforce a rule that doesn't exist. Vincent scheduled the meeting anyway, filed notice with the county recorder's office as an official community governance action, and posted flyers on every mailbox, something Dara's team immediately photographed as a potential mailbox tampering issue, which made me laugh until my sides hurt. Because federal law protects notices delivered to mailbox posts, not slots, and we'd attached ours to the post. The special meeting was set for January 15th. That gave us 3.5 weeks. 3.5 weeks to document the missing reserve money, finalize our legal strategy, and as it turned out, to survive one very specific icy morning in February that none of us had planned for. Vincent Calloway didn't sleep much that December. I know this because he texted me at odd hours, 11:47 p.m., 1:13 a.m., with screenshots and questions, the digital equivalent of a man pacing his kitchen in slippers with a highlighter. On the last Friday before Christmas, he found it. He'd been cross-referencing the HOA's bank statements, which he'd obtained through the member financial records request. Same as me, against the board meeting minutes, going back 3 years. What he found was a pattern that didn't show up in either document individually, only when you laid them side by side. Between March and September of the previous year, 5 disbursements had been made from the HOA's operating reserve account. They totaled $12,400. The meeting minutes for those months contained no votes authorizing expenditures of that magnitude. The minutes referenced only routine maintenance approvals, a gutter cleaning contract, a sign repair that had been separately invoiced for a combined total of around $2,000. The other $10,000 had gone somewhere, and there was no paper trail in the community documents explaining where. Vincent dug into the vendor information on the disbursement records. 2 of the 5 payments had been made to a company called Holcomb Property Solutions LLC. Deirdre's last name is Holcomb. Let that land for a second. He called me on a Saturday morning. I was drinking coffee on the back porch, steam rising off the mug, breath misting in the December air, a crow arguing with the sky somewhere overhead, when his name lit up my phone. "She paid herself," he said without saying hello. I set my mug down. "Say that again." "The LLC is hers. I found the Ohio Secretary of State filing. Holcomb Property Solutions LLC registered September of last year. Register agent Deirdre Ann Holcomb. The HOA paid that LLC over $10,000 in 8 months, with no board vote authorizing the expenditures and no contract on file. Ohio law is very specific about this. Under the Ohio Planned Community Law, board members have a fiduciary duty to the community. A board member who diverts community funds to a company she owns without disclosure and without a valid board vote is potentially liable for breach of fiduciary duty, a civil wrong that can carry personal liability. At higher dollar amount, tense, it can also cross into criminal territory, misappropriation of funds, or theft by deception. Takeaway: HOA board members have fiduciary duties. Undisclosed self-dang. Paying community money to businesses they own can be both a civil and criminal violation. Check your state's planned community statutes and your HOA's financial records annually. I forwarded everything to Rosalind Featherstone that afternoon and called her first thing Monday morning. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "This changes the nature of the case significantly," she said. "We were looking at improper fines and procedural defects. Now we're potentially looking at a report to the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit and possibly a referral to the county prosecutor's office." "What do we do with this information right now?" I asked. "You sit on it," she said. "You do not tip your hand. You let the January 15th meeting proceed, and you let her walk into that room thinking she still has the upper hand." We sat on it. It was the hardest thing I did in this whole mess. Watching Deirdre walk past my house on her clipboard inspections in January, logging violations with the serene confidence of someone who believes the rules don't apply to her, while I stood at my living room window, knowing exactly what was sitting in a manila envelope in my kitchen drawer. But patience is a strategy, and we were almost ready. The 2.5 weeks between Christmas and the January 15th special meeting were probably the most productive of my adult life. We were building a case the way you build a deck. Measure twice, cut once, and make sure every board is level before you put weight on it. First, the legal architecture. Rosalind filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit on behalf of the affected homeowners, documenting the procedural violations, the improp, early issued fines, and the financial irregularities. The AG's office doesn't move fast. These things take months, but a complaint on file is a matter of public record, and it signals to any future court or arbitrator that this wasn't a personal grudge. It was a documented pattern. She also drafted a demand letter, a formal legal demand for reimbursement of all improperly issued fines across the community, totaling just over $4,000 collectively. The demand letter cited each violated provision by section number, attached copies of the relevant bank records and payment timelines, and gave the board 30 days to respond or face civil litigation. It was 12 pages long and dense as poured concrete. Second, the financial trap. Vincent prepared a formal request for a full accounting of the HOA's reserve fund, citing OC 5-312-12, which requires HOA boards to make financial records available within a reasonable time and in a format that is reasonably understandable to a layperson. The request specifically asked for documentation of the 5 disbursements made to Holcomb Property Solutions LLC, including the board authorization votes, the service contracts, and the deliverables received. Here's the thing about asking for documentation you already know doesn't exist. You're not asking to get information. You're asking to force them to either produce something fabricated or admit there's nothing there. Either answer helps you. Third, the community vote mechanics. Vincent had studied the bylaws the way a chess player studies an opponent's recorded games. Under Section 4.6, removal required a 2/3 majority vote. Votes could be cast in person at the meeting or by written proxy, which meant homeowners who couldn't attend could designate someone to vote on their behalf. We had proxies drafted and notarized for 4 homeowners who couldn't make the January 15th date. That gave us a guaranteed floor of 18 votes going into the room. We needed 15 to hit 2/3 of 22. We had 18 locked. Even if Deirdre pulled every procedural trick she knew, the math was already against her. Fourth, and this is the part that made even Rosalind chuckle when I told her, the media play. My neighbor 2 streets over, a woman named Cecilia Drummond, had spent 20 years as a producer at a local television news station before retiring to Coshocton County to raise goats and grow tomatoes. She still had connections. I bought her a cup of coffee at the diner on Route 36, the kind of place where the counter stools are bolted down and the pie is always better than the coffee. And I told her the story. She listened with her hands wrapped around her mug and her eyes doing the thing experienced journalists' eyes do: cataloging, filing, connecting. The self-D'ing is your hook, she said. The fines are local news. An HOA president paying herself with community funds. That's a story that gets picked up. We don't go to the press until after the vote, I said. She nodded. But you let me come to the meeting as a private citizen, just a neighbor. But you let me come to the meeting as a private citizen, just a neighbor. But you let me come to the meeting as a private citizen, just a neighbor. You were invited weeks ago, I said. She smiled into her coffee. We also took care of a more immediate practical matter. The stretch of Millbrook Road at the bottom of Sycamore Ridge Drive, the curve at the base of the hill, had been a known ice hazard for years. Every winter cars slowed to a crawl there, or they should have. I submitted a formal hazard report to the Coshocton County Engineer's Office in early January, documenting the icing pattern and requesting additional signage and sand application. I sent a copy to my county commissioner and kept the confirmation email. I'm telling you this because it matters to what happens next. I did the right thing. I made the official report. I warned the county, and on a gray February morning, 2 days before the special meeting when Millbrook Road glazed over at 6 a.m., and I saw Deirdre Holcomb climbing into her Cadillac, I rolled down my truck window, and I told her, Deirdre, the road at the bottom of the hill is solid ice. There was already a near miss down there this morning. You should take it slow. She looked at me from behind oversized sunglasses, one hand on the door of the Escalade. She smiled the way people smile when they think they've already won. I've been driving in winter conditions since before you owned a truck, she said. But thank you for your concern. She said concern like it was a bad word. Then she got in her car, backed down the driveway, and headed toward the bottom of the hill. The sound reached me before I'd even finished pulling out of my driveway. A horn, a long skid, and then a sound that's hard to describe, somewhere between a crack and a crunch, like a 2x4 snapping, except the 2x4 is a utility pole, and the thing hitting it is a 4-tone-on Cadillac SUV. I pulled up 30 seconds later. The Escalade was perpendicular to the road, passenger side crumpled against the Fairpoint pole, bumper lying on the ice like a shed skin. The airbags had deployed. Deirdre was sitting behind the wheel, phone already at her ear, hair disheveled, sunglasses crooked on her face. She was not seriously hurt, bruised, shaken, embarrassed in the specific way that only comes from being proven wrong in public by a situation you were warned about. I called 900. I got out and asked if she was okay. She told me she didn't need my help. I waited for the sheriff's deputy anyway, standing on the shoulder of the road in the February cold, because someone had to give a statement about the road conditions, and I had a hazard report with a timestamp that said I'd done my due diligence 3 weeks ago. The deputy, a young guy named Hollister, took my statement with fingers stiff from the cold. Notepad balanced on the door of his cruiser. He noted the road conditions, the accident, my prior hazard report to the county engineer's office. He looked at me with a carefully neutral expression. Did you attempt to warn the driver prior to the accident? Yes, I said about 45 seconds before it happened. He wrote that down. Deirdre, standing beside the wrecker, heard this exchange. The look she gave me was not embarrassment anymore. It was calculation. The cogs were turning. A person who's embarrassed apologizes. A person who's calculating figures out how to turn the situation against you. Pay attention to which one you're dealing with. 3 days before the January 15th special meeting, Deirdre made her move. A letter appeared under the doors of the 12 homeowners who'd signed the removal petition. Not certified mail, not official HOA correspondence. Just plain envelopes slipped by hand sometime in the dark hours before 6 a.m. Inside each one was a single page typed and unsigned, listing what it called facts about the petition organizers. For Dwight Ackerman, it mentioned a 30-year-old DUI that had long since been expuned from his record. For Vincent Calloway, it referenced his divorce filing, a public record, but framed to imply financial instability. For me, it noted that I'd had a building permit pulled on a renovation 7 years ago. True, because of a clerical error that was corrected within 2 weeks, described as evidence of a pattern of code violations. It was a smear campaign, anonymous, cowardly, and from a legal standpoint, potentially actionable. I photographed mine. I texted the others. Every single one of them photographed theirs. By 8 a.m., we had a group chat going with 12 photographs of the letters, and Rosalind had an email by 9 a.m. If she sent these, Rosalind said, and we can establish that there are 2 potential claims. Defamation because several of the statim nats are false or misleading, and tortious interference with the HOA governance process. Save every copy. We also made a list of which households had received letters and which hadn't. The 4 households who hadn't received one were the 4 who hadn't signed the petition. Deirdre had gotten our petition list, which was not a public document, and used it to target us. That meant she'd either accessed petition documents improperly or someone on our side had told her, which started a quiet and uncomfortable internal audit of who had access to what. It turned out to be neither. Deirdre had photographed the petition through Dwight's storm door window when she'd come to deliver a fine notice the previous week. Dwight, who is 63 and not always thinking about surveillance angles when he answers his own door, had left the petition on his coffee table in clear view. Even so, the smear letters had the opposite of their intended effect. Bernarde Haas called me to say she was absolutely more committed than ever. Dwight called to say he was irked beyond measure. And when I get irked, I get organized. The Kowalski family, who had been on the fence about attending the meeting in person, confirmed they'd both be there. By the night of January 14th, we had 20 confirmed attendees for a 22-household community. Deirdre's allies on the board had not been idle either. I'd heard through Cecilia that Patrice had spent 3 days trying to convince neighbors that the meeting was illegal, which was false, and that Vincent had ulterior motives, which was vague enough to be unfalsifiable. It didn't matter. The math was still the math, and the manila envelope was still in my kitchen drawer. I ironed a shirt that night, set my alarm for 6, slept better than I had in months. The morning of January 15th was clear and cold, the kind of Ohio winter day where the sky is a pale, brittle blue and every surfa sea has that scrubbed, crystalline look, like the world got detailed overnight. My driveway crunched under my boots, that particular sound of frozen gravel that always takes me back to early mornings on job sites. The first guy there, breath steaming, the satisfaction of quiet work about to begin. By 9 a.m., I'd already received 2 texts from Deirdre's attorney. Both were variations on the same theme. The meeting lacked proper authority. The proxies were invalid under a bylaw provision. The attorney cited without quoting, and the board reserved all rights. Rosalind had reviewed both texts before I'd finished my second cup of coffee and responded that the meeting was validly called. The proxies complied with Section 4.6. 6. And any attempt to physically obstruct the meeting or deny homeowners entry would be documented as an additional claim. I forwarded Rosen's response to both board members and Cecilia, who I'd asked to arrive 15 minutes early and simply be present. She showed up in a barn coat and boots, notepad tucked under her arm, looking like exactly what she was, a retired journalist who hadn't forgotten a single thing she ever learned about watching powerful people make mistakes in public. The special meeting was held in the Sycamore Ridge Common area, a small enclosed pavilion at the end of the cul-de-sac, heated by a pair of electric wall units that smell like warm dust and industrial paint. By 6:45 p.m., 23 minutes before the 7 p.m. start, there were 16 people already seated, folding chairs on bare concrete, breath visible in the cold, the low hum of the wall heaters providing a kind of white noise that felt almost theatrical. Dira arrived at 658 with Patrice and Gorman flanking her like a small escort. She was dressed well, pressed slacks, a blazer, the kind of outfit that signals authority even when authority has been revoked. She glanced around the room. And I watched her do the count, the same mental arithmetic we'd all been doing for weeks. And I watched something shift in her expression when she got to the number. She had 3 board members. We had 20 homeowners. Steph, the 5th board member, the one who'd been going along out of fear. She was sitting on the homeowner side of the room. She'd texted me 3 days earlier to say she'd been uncomfortable with the board's direction for months and wanted to be on the right side of the outcome. She wasn't going to vote to remove Dira. She was going to vote to resign from the board and ask for new elections, which was in some ways more damaging. Vincent called the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Deirdre immediately raised a procedural objection, the same claim from her attorney that the meeting lacked proper authority. Vincent read Section 4.6 aloud, word for word. Then he said, "The petition was signed by 16 members in good standing. No bylaw provision restricts voting rights based on violation status. The meeting is valid. Do you have additional objections?" "This isn't over," Deirdre said. "No," Vincent agreed pleasantly. "It's just starting. We conducted the vote. Proxies were read and recorded. In-person votes were cast by show of hands, then confirmed by written ballot. Final count, 19 votes in favor of removal, 2 opposed. Patrice and Gorman, 1 abstention. Dira herself, per Robert's Rules of Order and the bylaws, did not vote on her own removal. 1-9-2. She was out. In the 3-second silence after Vincent announced the count, the room didn't cheer or applaud. It breathed out collectively the way a room does when something that's been held too tight finally releases. Bernarde Hawes put her hands in her lap and looked at the floor with an expression that was almost meditative. Dwight Arian nodded slowly, like a man watching a long equation finally balance. Then I stood up. "Before we adjourn," I said, "there's one more matter I'd like to bring to the membership's attention." I opened the manila envelope. The documents I pulled from that manila envelope weren't complicated. They didn't need to be. Complexity is the refuge of people who are hiding something. Truth, when it's real, tends to be simple enough to fit on 3 pages. I'd printed the HOA bank statements. I'd printed the Ohio Secretary of State filing for Holcomb Property Solutions, LLC. I printed a single table. Vincent had prepared it clean and clear the way an engineer prepares anything. No flourishes, just facts in rows, showing 5 payments from the HOA operating reserve to that LLC, dates, amounts, and the corresponding board meeting minutes containing no vote to authorize them. I laid a copy on the table in front of each board member. I handed a copy to Cecilia. I held one up for the room. Holcomb Property Solutions, LLC. I said registered with the Ohio Secretary of State on September 14th of last year. Registered agent Deirdre Ann Holcomb. Between March and September of this year, the HOA operating reserve paid this company $12,400. There is no board vote in the meeting minutes authorizing these expenditures. There is no service contract on file. There is no documentation of services rendered. The room was absolutely still. Dira's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, then something calculated, then a version of composed dismissal that she reached for like it was a life preserver. Those payments were for consulting services, she said. Property management consulting. The board was informed. Which meeting? Making. The board was informed. Which meeting? Vincent asked and opened his legal pad to a page of meeting minutes, clean and chronological. I have minutes from every meeting in that period. Show me the authorization vote. It was discussed informally. Discussed in isn't a vote, he said. Section 8.2 of the bylaws requires a recorded vote for any expenditure over $500. There is no recorded vote for any of these payments, and the board was not fully informed. I was not informed. Patrice started to say something. Gorman had gone the color of old concrete, staring at the table. It was Cecilia who spoke next, and when she did, her voice was the steady, measured voice of someone who has asked hard questions in front of cameras and never flinched. Ms. Holcomb, I'm Cecilia Drummond. I spent 20 years in local news. I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. You were saying you received over $12,000 in community funds through a company you own without a board vote during your tenure as HOA president. There are moments in public life when a room becomes something more than a room, when the specific combination of witnesses and documentation and confrontation crosses a threshold into accountability. This was one of those moments. I felt it in the way the air changed, a sharpening, a focus, the way a lens clicks into clarity. Deirdre stood up. This meeting is over. The meeting adjourned when we removed you from office. Vincent said, You're not the president anymore. You're a homeowner. You can sit down. She didn't sit down. She picked up her purse, said something to Patrice in a low voice, and walked toward the door of the pavilion, which was glass. Single pane, old frames, the kind that rattles in wind. She pushed it open and walked out into the January night, and every person in that room watched her go. What she walked out into was not quite what she expected. Two things were waiting. One was Cecilia's contact at the Cossacton Tribune, who had gotten a tip that something was happening at Sycamore Ridge that evening, and had sent a stringer out on spec. He was standing near the parking area, not recording, just present. Sometimes presence is enough. The phrase, "he of present," is enough. Other was a county sheriff's deputy, not Deputy Hollister, a different one, who had responded to a call that Rosalind had suggested might be worth making, a welfare check on the HOA's common area funds, a request for a civil standby during a disputed governance meeting submitted through proper channels that afternoon. The deputy had been sitting in his cruiser in the parking area. With the heat running, he stepped out when Deirdre emerged alone. I don't know exactly what was said. I know it lasted about 4 minutes. I know that when Deirdre got in her Escalade, the repaired one, new bumper still bright against the weathered body, her hands were shaking. Back inside, Cecilia looked at me across the room. You got a statement? She asked. I'll give you one on the record, I said. She uncapped her pen. Go ahead. I took a breath. Go ahead. I took a breath. The electric heater hummed. The windows were fogging at the edges from the warmth of 20 people in a cold pavilion. The community did what communities are supposed to do, I said. We paid attention. We read the documents. We showed up. The story doesn't have a single clean ending, because real life doesn't work that way. It has several endings staggered over the following months, like dominoes, falling in sequence. The Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit opened a formal inquiry into the HOA's fine practices within 6 weeks of our complaint. Rosalind negotiated a reimbursement settlement on behalf of the affected homeowners. $4,230 returned in full to the 12 households who had been improperly fined. The settlement required no admission of wrongdoing by the board, but the money came back, and that's what mattered. The Holcomb Property Solutions LLC matter was referred to the Coshocton County Prosecutor's Office. As of the last information I have, the investigation was ongoing. I won't speculate on outcome. I'll say only that breach of fiduciary duty in Ohio at amounts over $1,000 can constitute a felony. Deirdre retained private counsel. Patrice and Gorman both resigned from the board and issued written statements saying they had not been aware of the payments. Statements that may or may not be fully accurate, but that put distance between them and the financial irregularities. The Coshocton Tribune ran the story on a Wednesday. It was picked up by 2 Columbus outlets by Friday. It was the kind of local news story that travels because it's universal. Everyone knows a Deirdre. Everyone has felt the specific indignity of petty power exercised by someone who confuses authority with righteousness. Vincent Calloway was appointed interim HOA president by acclamation. His first act was to freeze all fines, pending a full by-law review. His second was to hire an independent CPA to audit the last 3 years of HOA finances and produce a report available to all homeowners. His third was to change the board meeting schedule to evenings so working residents could attend, and to establish a rule that all votes be recorded and minutes distributed within 72 hours. Simple reforms, obvious reforms, the kind that prevent the next year. The community did something else that I didn't expect and couldn't have planned. The money recovered from the fine reimbursement settlement, the full $4,230, was put to a community vote on how to use it. Several options were proposed. The vote wasn't even close. We established the Sycamore Ridge Community Scholarship Fund, administered through the Coshocton County Foundation, a 501c3 which made the donations tax-deductible. The fund awards an annual scholarship to a graduating senior from the local high school, preference given to students interested in law, public administration, or community service. The first recipient was a 17-year-old from our own neighborhood, a kid named Marcus, Dwight Arians Greya. Tents collapsed under the weight of the flood. The icy stretch of Millbrook Road at the bottom of Sycamore Ridge Drive got 2 new warning signs and a sand application program coordinated with the county engineer's office. Dwight Arick took it upon himself to personally call the county road crew after every significant freeze. He calls it his civic duty. He does it with the cheerful tenacity of a man who spent 30 years making sure the mail got delivered regardless of conditions. I repainted my mailbox post that spring, same color as before, no fine this time. Bernarde Hose put her wind chime back up on the first warm day of March. It's one of those bamboo ones that makes a low, hollow sound in a breeze like someone far away knocking on the door. I can hear it some mornings if the wind is right. I like it. As for Dara, she listed her house in April. It was under contract within 3 weeks. She moved somewhere in central Ohio, I was told. I don't know the specifics. I don't need to. The lesson she offers isn't about her. It's about what happens when ordinary people stop absorbing the cost of other people's arrogance and start doing the unglamorous work of reading the documents, showing up at the meetings, and making the system actually function the way it's supposed to. 43 seconds. That's how long it took for me. Brooke, he wrote to settle the argument the degree never thought she was having. She laughed at a warning. Flowed in the eyes didn't care who she was, what title she held, or whose smell bee she measured with a ruler that morning. Natural got no HOA, but here's the thing that actually gets me about G's story. It wasn't the crest. It wasn't even the vote 19-2 in the room she thought she controlled. It was the manila envelope sitting in the kitchen drawer for weeks while she kept writing finest, kept doing clipboard works, kept sending anonymous letters in the dark at 6:00 in the morning, completely unaware that the ground has already sifted under her feet. $20,400. Her own LLC, no board vote, no contract, no paper trail except the one she didn't know existed. She handed him the rope. He just waited for the right room to use it. That kind of patient is rare. Most people fight back too soon, too loud, too personal. Garrett, keep it pro, keep it documented, keep it cold, colder than that, February Road. So tell me, if you found out your HOA president has been quietly fighting herself with the reserve fund, what would you actually do about it? Would you know where to even start? That's not a rhetorical question. Drop it below. Surprise if you want to keep watching people like Garrett win the fight. Nobody think they can win. And remember, the person with the clipboard isn't always the one with the power.